joint presentation. Jay's going to start first, and we're going to talk about the last quarter century on soil health, a little bit of a journey, shared experience. So I'll turn it over to you, Jay.
Okay, something I want to kind of clarify is a lot of what we've talked about here today, especially Gabe and I, is something that's occurred over the last quarter century, and we've reduced it down to an hour or two. Okay, so that's where your minds, are trying to work through that situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a few minutes, and I'm just going to walk through a few things to give you a better context of this last quarter century, and then we want to talk jointly together with you in terms of going forward. What are the big hitters going forward? What are we going to be facing in agriculture? So we're going to walk through this thing, and I'm going to go fairly quickly. 85 to 16 is the timeline I took, okay? And basically what we started with, cropland soil health timeline, we started with tillage with low crop diversity. That's where we started. That was us, okay? I built blood structures on cropland because it did not have soils that would infiltrate the water. It ran across the surface and it created a lot of water erosion. Then we moved to direct seeding with low crop diversity. And we were there for a while, okay? Then we went to no-till with low crop diversity, but now we have the single disc openers. Then we moved to no-till with high crop diversity, 3 to 4 crop types. Then we moved to no-till with high crop diversity and cover crops. When we first moved into no-till, we didn't know what a cover crop was. Well, Gabe knew what cover crops were. He's been using them for a long time, and he's using 1 to 2 species. But it was in 2006 that we started really moving into the multi-species. Presently, we're in with no-till, high crop diversity, cover crops, and livestock integration. That's a quick timeline for your mind, okay? But you start to understand what we're talking about, where we've been the last 25 years. On rangeland, we started out, we were primarily season-long grazing. If you had 5 pastures, you had 5 herds, right? You had 3 pastures, you had 3 herds. Okay, so we kind of started, and then we started with some simple pasture locations. And so 2 to 5 pasture systems, but those really don't, the exposure periods are still too long, the recovery periods are too short in that scenario. Then we moved into grazing systems now that are up to 45 pasture systems. And we integrated the livestock pipelines as well, so we can put water where we needed the water. And then we started integrating it with cropland. Mob grazing and grazing tall aren't necessarily systems to us, those are tools. And if you've got a 30 pasture system, maybe you're mob grazing 2 or 3 of those pastures that you picked out for specific reasons why you want to do that. Okay, so those are tools. We think of mob grazing and grazing tall more as tools. But once we moved into the higher number of systems, once you get past 90% of your time in recovery modes. If you have 4 pastures and you have 1 herd and they're in 1 of those pastures, then you're at 75% recovery time, correct? Because 3 of them are recovered. Okay? If you go to a 5 pasture system, now all of a sudden where are you at? Well, you're in 1, so now you're at what, 80%? So when you get past 90, that's when we start to see improvement. When you get past 90% of the time in recovery. Gabe's in the high 90s. So he's seeing this progress much more quickly. So that's where we were at rangeland-wise. This was my stellar career on the left. I treated symptoms, that's what I did. Okay, I treated symptom after symptom, and I was caught up in that forest for quite a while. I built waterways, diversions, terraces, strip cropping, did all those things. I did them because the soils didn't function. But I couldn't see the problem at the time. I could only see the impact at the time. Second half, I tried to treat the problems. And the problems were, well, we had way too much soil disturbance, we had no armor, we had a lack of diversity, we had no covers. That's where we started. We had some help. We had some documents that really explained to us what it used to be. What was our original landscape? And so we go in and read these documents like Lewis and Clark, And we would understand that just in their journeys alone, they were identifying 125 new animal species and 178 new plant species, just in their little journey, above and beyond what they already do in eastern U.S. And then what I really appreciated from him was describing the resource between Pierce, South Dakota, and Bismarck, North Dakota, where they could see 3,000 head of wildlife at a glance. That's a pretty profound statement. That's hard for our minds to grasp. But that let me know where we're at. This information really helped me design cover crops. And this information really helped me design grazing systems. Because when I looked at this, and I saw that kind of plant diversity, why was I scared about using an 8-species cover crop mix? It was just starting to slowly mimic the original landscape. Why were we worried about putting together a 40-pasture grazing system? That was on the plains forever before we started European agricultural production. So why were we concerned about that? So this was a very helpful tool. This is the Bakken oil field. That's 17 wells on one pad. And they're pumping up and down, and you're standing there, you almost get dizzy. But it gives you an idea of the intensity of carbon removal that's going on in this nation. It's huge. We're still, even though the oil prices have come way down, we're still pumping out over 1 million barrels a day, either in a train or in a pipeline. And so we get some concept of this, but here's the issue. This is going to be short-lived. 100 years from now, we're going to be in systems that probably aren't even using this. We know we got nutrient cycling and nutrient loops that we need to close. Gabe and I are going to talk about this, and I think Gabe said he's got the total answer on the nutrient loop, so thought I'd set the stage for you a little bit. Okay. Every time we take off a truckload of grain, I used to see it as a truckload of grain. Now I see it as a truckload of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, the minerals, the vitamins, and it's not coming back. When I see the hay, I think in similar situations, I'm thinking that operator doesn't have legs on the cows. Okay? And so I look at that scenario differently as well. This is present day North Dakota. This is not settlers starting farming. This is present day North Dakota. We're taking out native rangeland at a very fast clip. It's coming out quickly. We're taking 100 plus species and replacing it with one. Is that system going to degrade? Yes.
Not to produce food,
Not to produce food. This is present day North Dakota. There goes our windbreaks. The highest concentration of single row windbreaks in the nation on our cropland. They are coming out quicker than the rangeland. That simplifies the landscape. And when you simplify the landscape, that's when we start to see soil degradation accelerate. Because we don't have the carbon to build that soil back. The windbreak was, in addition to wind erosion, it was one of the last refuges for the insect pollinator world. This is where they survive. This is where they live. And then probably the most difficult one is the simplified crop rotation. The scientists recently ran a report in the Bismarck Tribune. We simplified the crop rotation. Well, we know that, but now it's quantified. Okay, so we've simplified the crop rotation. That means less diversity, that means less diversity of exudates, that means all these things. That's not food security. That's the concern on it. And on the positive side, the cover crop scenario, I think, brings a lot of things to the table. So cover crop use in our 25 years that we're talking about so quickly here, the cover crop scenario brought big things to the table and had more of an impact than we realized initially. And we are still learning about their impacts, still learning about their management. But it brings diversity of carbon. And that's where I think we need to look at it. If we want to bring the livestock in addition, another area, very good. Sunflower production at the Minokan farm. Every other row is cover crops. Gabe showed something very similar. corn production at the Minokan farm. It's going to take the energy out of the raindrop, plus we got the diversity. Our grazing systems were one where we can see positive impacts on rangeland. And in order to bring positive impacts on rangeland, we got to be thinking to these numbers Gabe was talking about, bringing in high stock density numbers, short periods of time. That's what they were doing when Lewis and Clark observed them. Lewis and Clark watched the predators follow these animals. And they said the predators took out the old, the sick, the fat, the weak, and the young. And I always tell groups I need 4 out of 5. So I would have been gone by noon. They'd have got me. So you look at that whole scenario, but the genetics of the live animals would have been fantastic. They would have been very healthy. The gardening scenario is something that we've evolved into in this 25-year period. I hate to tell you this, but I'm a latecomer to the importance of gardening. It's huge. And it's going to only get more and more important as we go. But we do the high tunnel. We've got the feed bunks because now our cows have legs, so we've got all these excess feed bunks. What do you do with them? Put them in your high tunnel. Love it. Fill them full of soil and compost, and away you go. Compost, I think, is another important item. We try to scavenge everything off. North Dakota Game and Fish brings us carp. They net out carp, and they bring us pickup loads of carp. 3 guys, 2 netters, and a thumper. Works. And so away we go by adding the fish. The monitoring, I love the infiltration, slake infiltration and on-the-ground infiltration like Rhonda's doing here. I think those are all very good items that can be done. But we used an on-the-ground, boots on the ground approach, and it was wrapped up in conservation planning. And so you take the planning concept where you identify your goals. So important, identify your goals. And then we would walk through, we walked through all these tools, and we've had all the tours and the demos, et cetera, and the outreach that goes with it. But at the bottom of it all was really a boots on the ground approach. And if we didn't have good infiltration, you always knew because Rhonda would let you know that it wasn't. But you got to have some fun. We had soil district supervisors who supported the resource and put this on their own land. So they have these concepts on the ground. Over this 25-year period as we were evolving, they all went into the no-till systems and the grazing systems, et cetera. And of course, the outreach that was occurring, we had outreach at every turn, and groups would come, and we would learn from them as well. And this was a learning process. And international groups also. And I can tell you that a lot of these international groups are further down the soil health road than we are. And I think, we can learn a lot from where they're at as well. But I think there's a commonality of people that move towards soil health, and that is there's a willingness to share information. I think that's one of the big keys, is sharing the information. And the garden tours. We like to have the garden tours each year and talk about the evils of the rototiller. And that's a fun topic because everyone's got a new one in their garage, right? So we talk about those concepts and how to build soils in a garden setting, and those are doable. And of course, youth, and really we're growing a lot of plants. Plants heal these soils, but we have to grow people as well, and we have to grow young people, and we have to instill that. So just to cap this off, some changes in North Dakota. North Dakota State University is the only university system I'm aware of that has revised their fertility recommendations based on long-term no-till. So if you've got 5 years or more long-term no-till, there's a 50-unit credit for you. This is very well documented, very well researched. Same scenario in corn. Corn fertilizer recommendations got adjusted recently. And so again, based on long-term no-till. The governor signed a declaration on soil health. The governor might not have totally understood what it was, but he knew it was good. And there's been some soil health movement. NDSU added 5 new positions for soil health in 2012, and it's a start. That's a start. And NRCS has also moved in that area. So at the end of the day, we probably had about 70% of our producers move into no-till systems. About 60% of them moved into grazing systems. There's probably about 25% of them using cover crops, and there's about 10% of them that have never changed. And will not hesitate to tell you what you can do with the soil. And so you look at this whole concept of working with people and you try to find all these different means of connecting with them. So this is kind of just a 25-year quick scenario in terms of where we were at. And we could probably have the lights if we could, Mike. And then what Gabe and I thought we could do is maybe visit a little bit. We each kind of have some topics in our minds about going forward. And maybe we can have a discussion here to close out the conference in terms of, yeah, this is kind of where we've been the last 25 years, but what's the next, where are some of the next steps and where do we need to be concentrating on?
So first I'll start off and explain to Jay how I'm going to close that whole cycle. You see how big a man I am? It's actually in my will that my body gets laid out on our land and it gets recycled. That's the truth, and I'm serious about that. So that's how I'm going to close the loop, single-handedly.
One thing that closing the nutrient loop, I think we got to take a serious look at. And Dwayne back up here again really put this in perspective. And he said when a unit train of soybean leaves South Dakota, that's 400,000 pounds of phosphorus that's never coming back. Okay, that's not coming back. And I think we have to find out how to close this loop, this nutrient loop. And one of the ways that we can do this is, and we're going to do some of this fall at the Minokan farm, I think we could be doing much more harvesting with animals. And I think we can close this loop much more. Does it mean a change in our feedlot system? Yes. Do we probably need a change in the feedlot system? Yes. And so consequently, this might be an opportunity in disguise a bit also. And actually use animals to make that harvest in lieu of putting that semi-load of corn and sending it down to a feedlot somewhere in Nebraska or Kansas. The animals would come to the field instead. That would allow this nutrient cycling to occur. And ultimately, when they're slaughtered, any of the byproduct could come back and be composted and could go back to this field as well. And we start to work toward closing that nutrient loop.
Along with that, I think we're really going to see a closing as far as fossil fuel usage. On our operation, and we just finished doing the data from this past year to run our 5,000 acre operation, do all those enterprises, we used 2,400 gallons of diesel fuel. That's it. We were well over 8,000 back when we started this. So we've decreased it. Even though we've increased production exponentially, we've decreased the usage. Now, as Jay will discuss, we can do even more to close that loop.
Well, some of the vision that I think we need to be looking at is, this is probably not long-term. You know, on the whole life scale of the planet, the carbon use is going to be one little blip that's will hardly register on a life scale. One thing we can do is we can take a look at green plants from the viewpoint of our on-farm made diesel fuel, on-farm made energy. And I know it takes a press, but I know these are available, and I know used ones are available. Where you take X amount of your acres each year, that becomes your diesel fuel, and that's a closed unit within your operation. And again, you're not exporting near as much nutrient off the fields, plus you have the byproduct for livestock. And I think we need to look at new carbon for our fuel use. This is old sunshine carbon. This is pretty energy intensive because those are 2 to 3 mile wells. Those are fracked. There's another oil field underneath the Bakken that's going to be much deeper yet. You can envision the cost of bringing that to the consumer. And so how do we look in agriculture, in the future of agriculture, from an energy perspective? How many acres of sunflower would we need? Or how many acres of canola would we need? And then press that and have our diesel fuel from new sunshine carbon. And I think that's something in ag I think we have to take a serious look at.
Yep. And along with that, I really believe, and we saw it when I showed you the trends this morning in ag, one of the definite trends is to eat more local. And you're going to definitely see that. Instead of these nutrients traveling and our nutrition traveling thousands of miles, we're going to eat more seasonally, and we're going to eat more local. You know, due to things like hoop houses and that, we'll be able to, us in the northern environment, we'll be able to have some of these products available to us for a longer time period throughout the year. But we're going to have to use a lot less energy in order to do that. And we're seeing that. And along with that then, and tied into that, I really see in the near future, we as producers are going to be paid for nutrient-dense foods. It's not very far away where there will be testing what we produce for the nutrients, and then you'll be paid accordingly for them. I really believe that. Food will become, once again, health, and they'll be interrelated and along with the soil. And then we'll be paid accordingly for that. And the question each producer has to ask themselves, where do I want to be on that curve? You know, where do I want to be on this adoption stage? You know, do I want to be out at the forefront, be proactive, and have my operation ready? Or do I want to just tail behind? You know, it's much, much better to be leading the pack than it is to be tailing behind.
So in terms of gardens, I think whether you are in an urban or a rural setting, I think the garden or the hoop high tunnel gardens or rooftop gardens, whatever your environment is, one of the greatest clients I've ever had 3 pots sitting on a deck, lived in an apartment. And those 3 pots were the soils, and knew and understood the characteristics of everything you can think about that pertain to the chemical, physical, and biological aspects of the soil. And so I think we can take these smaller settings and we need to generate fresh, nutritious food. And we got to start by building that soil. And then from there, I think we can impact our own health. And I think that, you know, it's an item my wife and I have been working hard at the last number of years. And I think that's a very important part of it.
Here a few years ago, I had the opportunity to serve as a judge for one of the Growing Green Awards that the Natural Resource Defense Council puts out. And it was just what Jay just talked about. There was all of these people in these urban settings that were starting to produce food. The eventual person who ended up winning the award was actually in charge. He developed a program in the city of Detroit where they were taking all these vacant city lots and they were going into the schools and bringing the classroom portion out onto those vacant lots, starting to produce food. It was good for the children to get out, see how their food was produced, and then they were using that food in the school lunch program. You're going to see more and more things like that. Now that's going to take away some of the business from large commercial type enterprises. But that's okay because we're getting more food locally and we're getting more people involved in doing so. One of the things I wanted to talk a little about, Jay mentioned that oftentimes when we get visitors from other countries, their system, so to speak, their movement down the regenerative ag path is further along than ours. What's the one common denominator they have? Lack of government support. The best thing that could happen for production agriculture, in my opinion, in the United States is if we did away with the farm program entirely. And I apologize to all the NRS people that are here. But think about that, what that would do. I had the opportunity to spend time in Australia. When they got all their support prices taken away, those people had to learn how to survive and how to regenerate soils. It's the last slide I had on my presentation here. This is leading us down the wrong path. You know, this current production model. If you think for a moment that there's going to be feedlots 50 years from now, just look at the pressure that's being put on from society. It's not going to be there. We have to start changing now. Be proactive and start your operations changing to regenerative ag.
I guess my last comment is going to be in these terms, that I think we need to start addressing our cropping, grazing, gardening, orchard systems with this thought. So much of our scenario at present day is short-term economic gains at the expense of the resource. Have you seen this? No, we all have. That's really the item we need to address at the end of the day. How do we switch that around? And so much of our scenario has been the short-term economic gains at the expense of the resource. You know, when I take soil analysis in Burley County on the native rangeland, and then I go to the cropland on that same operation, typically on the cropland it's less than half. There's your scenario of short-term economic gains at the expense of the resource. There it is, right in front of you. And so how do we turn that around? I think we just spent 2 days talking about how to do that. But I think we need that thought in our mind as we move into any of these type systems. Do the economic gains come at the expense of the resource? And I think that's just a good thumbnail guide for us to take a look at. That was my closing.
That's a great closing comment. I can't add to that. Just remember, there's no reason to put it in traveler's checks and take it with you. So we gotta quit focusing on that instant gratification. In other words, that return, the return can be long-term, and that way we can really, truly have sustainability for future generations. That's what we need to think about.
Okay, you got a question?
The question is about the whole that's bigger than our farms and ranches. And that is, we have a monoculture in our cities, and it's great to have them learn about the production of food, but we have a whole lot of other issues there. And we've had a migration of about 100 years of people from the rural communities to the cities. Do you see that reversing when we regenerate our land and regenerate the possibilities for young people?
Well, and that's what I've been talking about over and over again, is how we're shrinking the size of our operation. I said yesterday how guilty I feel that I'm hogging 5,000 acres. We need 10 families or 20 families on those 5,000 acres. One of my mentors is a gentleman in Indiana. He has 7 sons. They have 550 acres. They employ 14 full-time people on that 550 acres. They supply eggs. They have over 7,000 customers that they're direct marketing to. You know, but think of all that entails. They now have 14 families living on that surviving on that 550 acres. What would that do to our small towns? What would that do to our economies? You know, it'd be a wonderful thing. That's why we need to move down this path. I have a neighbor who farms 40,000 cropland acres. And all I can think about is what a missed opportunity for so many people. I also told you how we had 80 applicants for our internship program. The vast majority of them were from an urban setting. We hired 5 for this summer. Only 1 has ag experience. The other 4 are from the cities. The next generation of great ag leaders will come from urban settings.
Also, if you get a chance, I'm just going to break apart this pen. So when you come down and take a look at the soil surface in these 2 containers, you can take a look at the soil head, and you can still see the soil aggregates. You know, it doesn't turn into mud. It's still got the soil aggregates. So you can take a look at that too. It would have lasted a month or more. I've had it on my desk for a month until the water just gets skunky. And eventually I throw it out. But I don't know when it would, I've had it as long as 30 days.
You should have drank that. Think of all that biology that good stuff.
I usually do.
Any other final questions? All right, let's give Gabe and Jay
Been a good group. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.